A film's preservation life often depends on a mere scrap of video history information, your rights holder's own words. Hello and welcome back to this damn fully dualistic crusade. In this video, I will be doing a brief overall video history of A Fistful of Dollars and its physical media releases. Now, this is not a comprehensive history of all of the film's releases in all markets and territories, not to mention all of the endless repackagings that were done by MGM over different formats. But it is a history of the film's various restoration attempts, refreshes, remasters, and overall cycle of fresh masters, which form the bulk of all of the releases globally across formats, primarily done by MGM UA in the earlier days of home video, and then slowly transitioning over to releases done from masters generated by Italian rights holders. So there's a sort of mix of two different versions of the film in terms of everything coming from MGM UA and then later just MGM using their elements, and then everything coming from the Italian rights holders, and of course also tied with the Leone estate, who not only have done their own restorations, but also have the original camera negative to work from, which MGM did not. MGM only had access to various interpositives and prints of varying kinds, so all of their video masters and releases were coming from elements that were multiple generations away from the original negative, and that's why the quality could vary, but was always lesser compared to the later Italian masters that were coming from original negative materials. Now, A Fistful of Dollars has quite a long history in terms of its physical media releases. It seems to be one of the initial offering of titles that was done under 20th Century Fox home video, the earliest days in the late 70s, early 80s. Most of the UA catalog wound up being handled by Fox, and of course later CBS Fox through the mid-80s roughly. At this early stage, most of these films were released originally by magnetic video. It's possible A Fistful of Dollars was released this way, but I'm just not entirely certain as I couldn't find a particular reference. However, the film is listed as one of the ones that Fox would offer for rental only. So the film was available to rent at stores, but it wasn't a film you could actually purchase. As in the earliest days of physical media, most films and releases were only available to rent, and if you wanted to purchase them, you had to pay an extraordinarily exorbitant price to purchase a tape copy. That all changed when the film's first commercial release that consumers could purchase happened on, of course, RCA's infamous CED system. This has really lovely, unique art with the sort of circle aesthetic with custom pieces that you see on most CEDs of this era. And like the James Bond films and a number of other United Artists films, they made early debuts on home video on the CED format, which was, of course, very short-lived. This is very likely the same transfer that turned up on the initial CBS Fox releases, being drawn from a cobbled together number of prints, and of course is pan and scanned and will be of limited quality due to the nature of the CED format. However, this was technically one of, if not arguably the first consumer release that you could actually purchase and own, and thus be able to have the film in your house and watch it whenever you wanted to. Also, it should be noted that the art, rather amusingly, while it's quite nice, is actually taking the key art from the original US poster of the film's sequel for a few dollars more, so it's not really even the correct artwork, but it looks great. Shortly thereafter, in 1983, CBS Fox took over the film and released VHS and Beta copies in what is termed their big box design. This has the artwork that was later used on the standard VHS and Beta releases, but in a large slip-out box with a tray. The only difference other than the packaging between this and the reissue the next year is that the VHS tape does not have hi-fi audio. It's merely a linear mono track. So the 1984 version has the exact same art, but as you can see, is just a standard slip sleeve in terms of the VHS release. This uses a portion of the iconic United Artists original artwork and looks quite nice for what it is. It has the iconic CBS Fox standard spine on gray and the traditional rear cover, which leaves, a lot of white space, but it was the first major release you could actually get at a decently affordable price. But the benefit of this repressing done slightly later over the much more collectible and more expensive first pressing in the big box tray is that this tape actually does have hi-fi audio, which makes all of these CBS Fox basically second printings actually more important and more valuable than their first printings, but the collector's market is so geared towards finding those big box releases. The way you can tell about the superior hi-fi audio track is, of course, on the rear, you see recorded in hi-fi, and it's also on the label as well. Now, this release is using a transfer that, as I alluded to before, is basically a rough mixture of some different elements. It is, of course, pan and scanned, which is not how you want to see Leone's masterpieces, but it is quite solid for the era, and in terms of overall quality, must have been quite mind-blowing to be able to see this level of quality in your house on a CRT television in 1984 with a solid, at least, hi-fi presentation of the mono mix. However, this mastered is unfortunately missing a little bit of footage in terms of missing some frames and obviously some of the original sensor trims that were done in different countries. On top of that, all the editions that use this mastering seem to revert to a version of the audio that's actually the Italian mono for the last roughly almost minute or so the last sort of faint lines of dialogue. So you get the sense that this is very much a raw as-is transfer, and they had to cobble together some different prints and mix them together. But it's still fun to look at, but it's also important for having a relatively as-is transfer of the mono mix in terms of the English dub. The only trouble is that the VHS Hifi on this release does seem like it has had some noise filtering applied to it. So it sounds good for what it is, and this is actually quite impressive, but it was very easily outdone by its bigger brother the next year. And that is, of course, the 1985 CBS Fox Laserdisc, which uses the exact same master, the exact same artwork, but of course is on Laserdisc with much better picture quality. The only downside is that the audio is analog only, so it doesn't have a digital PCM track, and Laserdisc analog is quite limited in its fidelity compared to VHS Hifi. So typically releases like this you get merely for having the better picture quality and having the nicer cover. This also has a really nice high gloss finish to it, and a fancier looking rear cover with more images and a better layout with the text. So you can tell this is definitely the bigger brother compared to the 1983 and 84 tape versions. However, what's really odd about this, and this is something that you run into with releases where you really find you have to compare everything, the audio on here, even though it's technically on an inferior format than the VHS Hifi, is actually better in its fidelity. It doesn't have the sort of noise filtering that's on the VHS tape. So this is actually the most untouched presentation of the film's original English dub in terms of the English mono mix. And so in spite of the film not being complete on here and being pan and scanned and having a lot of wear and the audio having, quite a bit of wear in it because it's just mixing and matching different print sources and it's still reverting to Italian for the last minute or so, this is the best, most hands-off presentation of the English mono mix you can get, in spite of the wear and the defects and it not being 100% complete. And in terms of the Aero Video restoration of the film, this audio track comes into play later, which I'll discuss when we get to that release. The film would remain in this sort of status for a couple more years until the film was then reissued and refreshed to be completely under the MGM UA home video banner. This is what happened for the entire United Artists catalog and MGM films as well. So by 1987, 88, 89, you would see brand new video releases and at least some VideoMaster refreshes for the MGM UA catalog to then be entirely off of the CBS Fox label. So on Fistful, we saw the VHS release in 1988, which was the first appearance of the sort of iconic rendering of Clint Eastwood as the man with no name, with this sort of wonderful dusky brown. But here was put on VHS with the lovely silver top banner that you get on the MGM releases of this era. It's got the sort of hollow foil effect. And then, of course, we have this spine that matches all of the MGM UA releases at this time. And then here's the rear. Apologies for the glare, as this is still in the shrink wrap. This has a hi-fi mono track and does seem to be a new master, at least trying to refresh and work on the film in terms of trying to get it complete, even though it's still obviously pan and scanned. Unfortunately, this does sound muffled and sort of filtered compared to the past releases, whether you've got the VHS or the better Laserdisc analog in terms of the English mono. So MGM UA did work on refreshing the film and tried to make the video and audio better, but in the process managed to actually process the audio some. However, this was a technical improvement in terms of it being a better tape release, it being newer, it being more polished in the master. But if you were wondering when the film's first major letterbox release was, or how the Laserdisc would be updated, it finally saw an update for the 1990 release, which looks like this. It obviously uses the same artwork and is coming from the new work that was done, but for some reason there was a 2-year gap between the VHS release and the Laserdisc, but the Laserdisc was actually letterbox, as you can see on the top here, the way MGM would always put the deluxe letterbox edition banner on the top. So this looks much fancier in terms of the jacket, but it was the film's first letterbox release, so you were finally able to see something approaching the original Technoscope imagery. The rear is okay. It's a little plain, which is common to MGM catalog Laserdisc releases of this time, but again, the real major thing is that this was the first letterbox presentation of the film on physical media, and it has a PCM mono track in terms of the English dub, so it's lossless CD quality PCM. However, it does sound quite muffled and has varying fidelity, and when you compare this to even the 1988 tape, in some places that actually sounds less muffled. So unfortunately, when MGM was working on this film at this time, they did apply a degree of audio processing or used a different source that wasn't as good as the one that was used on the original home video masters on the CBS Fox releases. So this is really just a milestone for getting the lovely art and getting the letterbox transfer finally out there on some format. And in terms of visuals, this was certainly the best looking release to this point. But of course, you do have to keep in mind that MGM was relying on prints and interpositives because they never had access to the negative. And of course, not that film negatives were being utilized in the Laserdisc era in terms of modern restoration work, in terms of how that's done, but they were always having to use lesser elements on this film because that's all they had. Now, over the years, MGM UA and then later just MGM would do an endless series of repackagings of the film, both as a standalone and in box sets containing the entire Dollars trilogy. Each of these would be the same master that was already released on the standalone version, and this would run until the film was remastered or retransferred again, and then all of the repackagings after that would typically be that newer mastering. So the only major repackaging to really discuss at this point, I think, has to be the Laserdisc box set version. This was released in 1993. It's marketed under the name of the Clint Eastwood Trilogy, but this is essentially the Dollars Trilogy box set on Laserdisc that MGM did. This brings together all widescreen, letterboxed, standalone Laserdisc editions of the films, complete with their own transfer quirks. So essentially, this is just bringing together all three of those in a nice lift-top box with nice imagery. Inside, there's a single-page, double-sided color insert to give you the chapter stops of each film, and this is one of the MGM boxes that actually managed to have each of the films separate from one another. Yes, they're all discs in a box set, but thankfully it's not one of these sets where the films ran into each other and you had the start of a film halfway through a side. But again, these are exactly the same as the standalone versions. The only thing is that the side breaks may be a little bit different, and typically when you had films that had a third side, those would be CAV encoded on the standalone releases, and then in the box set versions to save space, those would be CLV. The rear gives you the little blurb that MGM used for each film on the rear covers of the standalone releases. So really, the box set artwork and this insert are the only exclusive aspects compared to the standalone versions. And I should also mention that all three films on this box set and on the standalone releases do at least include one of the original American theatrical trailers. So throughout the rest of the 1990s, the film stayed in this mastering, whether it was on one of the countless VHS reissues that would just update and refresh cover art, or you were actually rich enough, essentially, back in the day to have either the standalone letterbox Laserdisc or have the box set version. None of the Dollars trilogy was ever reissued on Laserdisc. It was merely updates to the VHS release to match the then current VHS catalog in terms of how MGM would refresh and update the marketing. Around the late 90s, seemingly in about 1997 or so, MGM did start working on trying to upgrade their Leone releases, potentially for an updated Laserdisc release late in the format's life. Now, those late release Laserdiscs did not happen, but instead we got DVD releases. So I think MGM was trying to gear up for maybe doing a last Laserdisc or just go ahead and focus on the DVD, which is seemingly what they switched to. So we did see releases of the Dollars trilogy very early on DVD, and then eventually all three were brought together in a box set. These were, of course, relatively early DVDs, and so were bare bones in terms of not having any supplements and not being special editions, and primarily still being mostly based on the letterbox Laserdisc masters. But they did do new element transfers, and they did basically go through what they had in their vaults and their archives, which meant the films did get refreshed some, and now you were getting component video, even if they weren't all anamorphically enhanced. The film was released on DVD in 1999 with the new updated cover artwork, and of course saw many different reprintings, but all of them have this artwork. The original printings of these DVDs did come with a nice insert, as MGM would do at the time, but this is a later pressing that unfortunately doesn't have the booklet, but the actual artwork is otherwise the same, except for the updated MGM logo on the spine and the updated copyright date. Inside, you just have a flipper disc on Fistful, because this includes, unfortunately, a pan and scan version on the flipper side. So if you're ever curious about the pan and scan version or wanted one for whatever reason, that is here on the side B of the DVD release. Now, in terms of the presentation, this is essentially an updated version of the letterbox Laserdisc master, but now on DVD and component video. Unfortunately, it is not anamorphic enhanced, so if you're watching on a 16:9 display, you'll get the dreaded picture boxing effect with black letterboxing bars on all sides, and the image sort of shrunk down in the center. The image is improved over the Laserdisc, obviously, but it is still primarily based on that same material. The audio is now, of course, lossy Dolby Digital of the English mono, and unfortunately is still primarily based around the muffled processed sounding version of the English mono that was on the Laserdisc in terms of the letterbox release. But in certain sections, it actually does sound better than that. So obviously they did do some work on it, and so it's an improvement on certain sections of the film in terms of the mono mix fidelity. It's never as good as the sound of the old CBS Fox releases, but at least this is complete. And while major portions of the film sound as crummy as the letterbox Laserdisc did, at least there are sections that are better, so it is technically better than the Laserdisc audio, even though it's lossy and basically coming from the same sources. And on top of that, this marked actually the last time you had a proper version of the English mono that didn't have any further major problems or wasn't a downmix of a remix on any physical media release until the 2025 Aero 4K UHD. So that makes this DVD important for that reason. While the disc did not come with any extras, it was an early DVD that at least had a somewhat passable attempt at a themed menu. It's mostly a static one, but at least it has a tiny bit of movement and some custom sort of, I guess, westerny sounding music to it. So at the very least, when MGM did the DVDs for the Dollars films, they tried to at least give it sort of a themed menu, but it's very obvious these are still early DVDs that are mostly based around the pre-existing letterbox Laserdisc masters and have their issues sort of carry over. As usual, the film then was stuck this way for a good number of years, and since the DVD of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was actually anamorphically enhanced, it meant that watching the other two Dollars films on DVD really kind of sucked once you got a 16:9 display because, of course, they were non-anamorphic. But MGM did actually work on upgrading the films again and doing new restoration work. This was tied into the aftermath of the 2003 expanded edition restoration project that was done for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which was released in 2003 and then released on disc in 2004. The idea was that they would also do work on the other two Dollars films and also DocuSucker, which they own the rights to, and then make special edition DVDs and perhaps a box set. However, due to various unknown reasons, this work was done in 2003-2004, but not released on DVD until 2005 in Region 2, so the UK got these in 2005, and then here in the US, we had to wait until 2007 to get this work in terms of the new masters and new restoration efforts on the other Leone films that MGM had access to. So if you ever wondered why there was a delay, well, I certainly lived through that, and it seemed to have something to do potentially with rights or something, because again, the British releases did happen several years before the American ones. All of the extras and supplements were generated around 2003-2004 as well, so that's why they also seem significantly older and have copyright dates before 2007. What made this all the more ironic was that when we finally did get the special edition DVD in 2007, that was also the year of the new Italian restoration that was done from the original camera negative and had much higher quality than the MGM restoration efforts. However, that Italian restoration was never released here in the US on physical media, and you had to look at the various import releases that started coming out around 2008. So it's kind of funny how all this timed up, and I assume that the delay in getting the releases out maybe had something to do with the two different rights holders between MGM and then the Italian rights holders not necessarily seeing eye to eye and having to work out a potential agreement. So the new special edition masters had new 5.1 sound remixes and also new supplements. These were all released together in a box set entitled the Sergio Leone Anthology, alongside the 2004 DVD of the rather ill-advised MGM recut extended version of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly with its notorious 5.1 sound remix. All of the new releases carried the same aesthetic as MGM's 2004 DVD, so they look quite nice, but I never had the box set. Instead, I opted for the standalone versions, which have the beautiful treated artwork with the title, just like the 2004 GBU DVD. The title is actually embossed, and as you can see, there is a really nice high gloss on the image, and then also nice texturing on the actual white cover of the slip box. And then they've even got the 2-disc DVD collector set moniker printed in a sort of shiny copper as well. The spine has been updated to not only have the collector's edition on the top, but have the modern MGM art. And then the rear is done to match the GBU DVD release as well. And this also has the nice gloss finish on the images, so it looks really fantastic, and I think MGM really knocked it out of the park with the art design on these. And so while it is nice to have all these DVDs together in the Anthology box set, I think the standalone releases are much fancier and actually much better, because you take the really lovely slipcover off, and then you've got the same art on the DVD case, but as you can see, the case is actually white, which really gives these a nice, unique look. And this is one of the fanciest releases of the Dollars trilogy you can get. So if you're like me and you really love nice packaging on some of your favorite films, these are still really nice to hang on to. Plus, you're getting all the extras that were made for this release on their original release, so typically these can look better than versions ported over to Blu-rays, which haven't been presented very well. So inside you have the 2 discs, the feature disc and the supplements disc, with the new artwork done to match that 2004 GBU DVD, again with the rather nice looking white case. And then you have the wonderful booklet done in the same style, again on really nice glossy paper, and this has the notes and images on Fistful. The box set did have all of the booklets combined, but it's actually kind of nicer to have them individually, just like it is to have the case by itself. So that's why I opted for these. Plus, if I'm remembering correctly, I think these came out first and then the box set package came out later, and I had already bought these at the time. And then when I saw the box set, I was actually kind of glad that I picked up the standalone versions first, and because I have the first pressing, I have the white case with the individual booklet and then the really nice slipcover. So that's partly why I've hung on to these. Now, in terms of this release, this is, of course, a remaster and refreshing of the film. MGM did brand new scans and generated, I believe, new film prints as well. They essentially were working from the inner positives they had and also various other prints. So as before, they are having to work from generations away from the original negative, which is why all the MGM versions look much less saturated in their color. They look much less detailed. They're usually heavily cropped in terms of the image isn't the full image, and they are obviously coming from lesser elements as they're generations away from the original negative. But this was still a giant improvement in visual quality over what came before. Of course, this is still DVD, and though it was seemingly a master that was being generated for HD and would later get upgraded to Blu-ray, it definitely shows its age now and has all kinds of edge enhancement and other things, but still, it was an improvement and a move forward visually. On the audio side of things, they did a brand new 5.1 remix, but it was still a sound remix nonetheless that was totally unnecessary and saw brand new application of even more noise reduction. So it is a revisionist track that you shouldn't watch the film with, as Leone's films were very intricately designed in their original mono tracks. Despite the limited fidelity of those, that is how these films were meant to be heard and experienced. But at the very least, the MGM 5.1 remix here is still passable, as it's not completely in-your-face revisionist as the GBU 2003 remix was. But still, it does manage to tweak a few things and mess with the overall balance and levels, and so it's not advisable to watch this release with that remix. There is a track labeled original mono, but unfortunately it is a mono downmix of the remix. So while it's better technically because it's now in a single channel form like the original mono, it isn't the original mono. So unfortunately, all MGM releases after the 1999 DVD no longer had any form of the original English dub in terms of the mono. The good thing, though, is that this has a secondary Spanish mono track, which seems to be an earlier pre-existing Spanish mono dub, or perhaps even the original Spanish mono done for the theatrical release. So when you watch this particular version of the film, I would recommend watching with the Spanish mono track, which is similar to how I always watched the 2004 GBU DVD in Italian, as that included an Italian mono that didn't have the greatest fidelity, but at least it was an original mix of the film. So I was the kid who was watching my Leone DVDs in the foreign dub versions that were on some of them with English subtitles, because I was an audio purist even then. The MGM extras were generated for this release, so this has the Sir Christopher Frayling audio commentary, and of course the resurrection of the long thought lost network television prologue of the film, plus an interview with Monty Hellman about that prologue, and interviews with Leone collaborators, and most famously for this release, a short interview with Clint Eastwood. So everything you see on the modern releases that are old standard definition MGM extras, they were made and released released on this release, but do keep in mind they were originally made back in around 2004, and this set was supposed to come out in probably 2005, but we then had to wait another 2 years and didn't get it until 2007. Now, the aforementioned 2007 restoration that was done in Italy did have a theatrical release, which I did see one of the 35mm prints struck from it, but its home video debut was on the 2008 Italian Blu-ray from Ripley's Home Video. This was very quickly imported by a lot of people in the US, as the film took a little while longer to get an official MGM Blu-ray release. So this was a solid Blu-ray for the time, but does seem to have taken that Italian restoration and unfortunately introduced some additional home video quirks. It looks fantastic and is far beyond any of the American video releases to this point. It doesn't have any image cropping issues, and the color is extraordinarily saturated, but probably a bit too much compared to how the film really looks in its best versions. So this was really the best early option to see the film on an HD presentation for those who got into Blu-ray early or those who couldn't wait for MGM to do their Blu-ray version. This was, of course, an Italian release, so it carried the Italian credits instead of the English ones, and, of course, had both the Italian and English mono tracks. Unfortunately, the fidelity of both is not the greatest. The English mono, though, rather surprisingly, does sound better than the MGM DVD did, but it has a number of clicks and dropouts, and unfortunately the opening and closing titles are taken from other sources that may even be remixes and don't sound great. This became a rather pricey release to import, especially when it seemingly went out of print, so I was never able to get a physical copy of it, but I did eventually get a later German version, which comes a few years later, so I'll get to it after the next release. MGM released The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly first on Blu-ray, which unfortunately was a version of the home video master of the 2003 re-edit, and was also filled with tons of digital noise reduction, and was an extraordinarily disappointing Blu-ray debut. Eventually, they released the other two films in 2010 and 2011, which were then, of course, repackaged with the not very good disc of GBU, and then, of course, repackaged many times since. All three of these were, of course, based on the work and releases of the special edition versions, so they were essentially 1080p HD upgrades of those. They ported over all of the MGM extras, which were still, of course, standard definition, and unfortunately had all of the same audio problems. Now, in terms of the physical releases, I have the later 2014 Man with No Name Trilogy repackaging, which takes the same not good MGM Blu-rays of A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More, and packages them with the then new updated GBU disc, which was the first appearance of the dreaded Ritrovata master, which was a 4K scan, but with the horrible revisionist color grading. This is a nice enough slipcover with updated images and some gloss and embossing on the sleeve, and then with the same matching art on the case itself. But inside you have the same 2010-2011 discs for the first two films, which are just updates of the 2007 special edition DVDs. And then the third disc is, of course, the 2014 disc of GBU with updated artwork. That's how you can tell them apart. And, of course, this is the first printing of the GBU disc, as it was later replaced by a second printing that was hard to identify that carried a chase audio attempt to restore the original English mono that did not go very well. So essentially what you have on this Blu-ray of A Fistful of Dollars is an HD update of the 2007 special edition version. So it is now in HD. It has all of the same issues, now much greater magnified because it's 1080p HD, and you can also see that there was a great deal of digital noise reduction in this master on the first two films. So basically all of the warts and problems that were in the special edition version are now magnified by being a not very good 2010 era MGM Blu-ray. The only difference here is now in the extras, there's a new extra with Sir Christopher Frayling talking about some of his poster collection of A Fistful of Dollars, and this is a new HD extra that runs about 20 minutes. Everything else is a port of the standard definition legacy extras. So really all you're getting here with the Blu-ray is a bump up in resolution to 1080p of the same not very good MGM master from their inferior elements. So you've got the desaturated color, the lack of fine detail, now hit with digital noise reduction, and the extensive image cropping, and the generational loss. But then you've also got their 5.1 remix, which was already not good, now upgraded to a lossless codec. And then there's a lossy English mono track, which is again just a downmix of the remix. So that's unfortunately misinformation once again. And then there is a secondary Spanish mono track, which is either an older Spanish mono or some version of a mono of a remix. And then, not to be left out, there's a French audio track, but that is a DTS 5.1 track, so it's a French dub of a remix, so that's unfortunately kind of pointless as well. So in 2013, there was a German Blu-ray release from Universum Films of the Italian 2007 restoration. So I have it here on the very affordable double feature set of the first $2 films of the much better foreign HD presentations. But here on Fistful, this is coming from that 2007 Italian restoration. It's very similar to the 2008 Ripley's Home Video Italian Blu-ray, but this doesn't have the same sort of color signature. In fact, the color timing on this release seems a little bit different, but it is otherwise the far superior Italian restoration over the rather inferior MGM iteration. So this really became the new sort of best HD standard you could have of the film, as this was region-free, very easy to import, and also very inexpensive. The only issues here are, of course, I don't think the color timing is fully spot on, and the English mono presentation is unfortunately a down mix of MGM's remix once again, but sounds like it's been processed further, so this actually doesn't sound as good as the down mix of the remix that's on the MGM versions. So on this release, you're kind of going to be wanting to look more at the German mono track, or live with the English mono track, or sync a different audio source to this release. And of course, you've also got German titles now instead of the English titles in terms of the title sequence. But this was the best and easiest way to get your hands on a version of the 2007 Italian restoration, and for a great number of years has remained one of the go-to versions. But again, it's best if you added or synced an alternative audio track to this release. What's also nice about this release is that they used original German poster art on the artwork and disc labels. But I should also mention that when you look at this, it does have pretty much most of the MGM legacy extras and things, but as this is a European release, those are PAL versions. So even if you have a region-free Blu-ray player looking at this, if you don't have the ability to play PAL standard definition video, you won't be able to watch the extras, as they are in PAL and non-NTSC. Eventually, Leone and Ritrovata did a 4K scan of the other $2 films, and on Fistful we saw a similar revisionist color grading that was completely terrible applied to A Fistful of Dollars, as happened to the Ritrovata master of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But instead of MGM doing a home video release here in the States on Blu-ray, it was licensed to Kino Lorber, who did a release of the film of this new Ritrovata master, which of course had far more detail than any past American home video release, and was a more modern scan compared to the 2007 Italian restoration. So visually, it had more detail than any other release of the film or any restoration of the film to that point. But it had completely horrible color grading applied that was completely inaccurate, and especially seemed to focus on trying to add greens to the image. On top of that, there was also a degree of image cropping compared to the 2007 Italian restoration, so that was unfortunate. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, there was a brand new supposed restoration of the English mono mix that apparently went back to original sources and the original stems for the dialogue, music, and effects, and did a brand new mono remix of the original mono that had completely wrong levels. And so the music overpowered everything. The fidelity was all over the place and was very distracting. And on top of that, the dialogue and sound effects were not only frequently drowned out, but they were also clipped or cut off in places. So parts of the dialogue were actually missing, and so were some of the sound effects. It was a completely botched restoration attempt that unfortunately lasted through the next couple of releases. So for a good number of years, the only audio you had was this defective audio track that was labeled a mono restoration, when in fact it was a desecration of the original mono mix. Yes, it had a lot of clarity, but it wasn't an original mix and was very clearly flawed. And anyone who knows this film very well and has seen it many times would be able to tell you pretty much immediately that something was wrong with the audio. There was also a 5.1 remix option on this disc, which actually just took the botched new mono restoration and tried to bring it into a 5.1 environment by spreading the loud, very dynamic and ill-fitting music across the channels with a little bit of LFE bass and surround enhancement. So it basically just spread the botched mono track around and just sort of rubbed it in by having it bounce all around you to a degree. So really the audio was just as big of a problem as the terrible color grading of this presentation. So for these reasons, I avoided the Kino Lorber release because there was really no point to it. It did, however, use the original 1967 United Artists one-sheet theatrical poster artwork for the film's American release, and of course ported over all of the MGM legacy extras. Unfortunately, those were not properly encoded and had a variety of frame rate issues, like Kino's other releases of Leone films, so those were problematic to watch through. And the only true positive of this release is that they commissioned a new commentary track from the great Tim Lucas, who recorded a fantastic commentary for not only this film, but also the Kino releases of the other $2 films, so he did commentaries for all three. So really, the only positives of the Kino release was that it was technically coming from a modern high-resolution scan of the film, even though the final master and picture and sound was frankly crap. And it had a great new Tim Lucas commentary. That was it, because even the old MGM extras weren't properly presented on the disc. That's how the film stayed until 2022, when Kino brought out their UHD release. This was an attempt to address the color problems of their first go-around in terms of going back to some of the master files for the Ritrovata release and doing some color regrading to try and tame down some of the revisionist color. But nothing was done to the sound or the defective extras in terms of the legacy extras. So essentially, this is the Kino Lorber Blu-ray with an attempt to address some of the color timing problems now on a new Blu-ray, but also an SDR UHD. So the UHD is a 4K presentation, but only in standard dynamic range, and that's how all three of the Kino Dollars Trilogy UHDs are. They're all SDR releases. So in terms of image and color, this is better than the first Kino release, and that, of course, was at least welcome, so that's why I finally picked this up. Plus, I was curious to see the 4K SDR presentation and how the Ritrovata 4K scan looked in 4K resolution. But, of course, this still has color problems. Even though they did work on it, it's not perfect, and it's also not as good as an effort as their GBU UHD was, which was the only one of their Dollars Trilogy releases that worked with the fan community and Leone historians to try to make that as good as it could, coming from the Ritrovata master. So essentially, this was a second go-around for Kino Lorber, and they were trying to at least address some of the issues of their first Blu-ray release. So it's like GBU in that sense, but it differs in that this didn't get any involvement from outside influences or historians, and it still has the hideously defective audio and defective extras. So really this was just improving the visuals a bit and giving you an SDR UHD, but that's the only real improvement. So the film was still in need of a great deal of help and still needed a complete audio restoration and brand new color grading from scratch as well. This, of course, did come with a slipcover, as Kino usually does in their typical style. So it looks nice enough, but it's pretty straightforward. And then we have the generic Kino rear cover. The case itself is exactly the same and has the same generic rear. And then we just have each of the discs inside. So by 2022, that's where the film stood. A whole host of different issues dating back, some dating back to the film's original production and release in 1964, and there was still no definitive restoration or definitive home video release. So then Arrow Video enters the picture and has a surprise announcement that they're doing an entire Dollars trilogy release with brand new work. Now, this was quite an extensive process, and on A Fistful of Dollars was still having to use the same 4K scan of the original negative done by Ritrovata some years before. But Arrow, on their limited edition release, actually went back to the raw scan and redid the work from scratch, meaning that the color timing was exceptionally well done and without any of the revisionism problems dating back to Ritrovata's own color grading that was on the first Kino release. So this is far superior in overall picture to both of the Kino versions of the Ritrovata master. This still has some of the quirks of the source master and appears similar for the most part because it's coming from the same scan. But the beautiful encoding job, the natural film grain appearance, the beautiful appearance of the color timing, the black levels, the overall much more natural appearance of the image, and even improvements in the film's day for night sequences means that this vaults ahead visually over the Kino editions. And Arrow also did brand new HDR grading on these. All three films were done in SDR, HDR10, and Dolby Vision. The Dolby Vision is extraordinarily tasteful on this and has no brightness issues or pop-out issues in the image. So visually, even though they were still having to use the same Ritrovata source scan, I think this looks really as good as it can, and they put in a ton of work to get it to that point. All of this is the work that really should have been done in the first place and wasn't, unfortunately. But this is not just a regrading of pre-existing files. This is putting in a ton of work and getting proper reference materials to try and make this 4K scan as good as it possibly can be. And visually, I do think this is far beyond any other release of the film. Audio-wise, Arrow did do a brand new restoration of the English mono mix and also did restoration work on the original Italian mono, which is included. Both also have 5.1 up mixes of these new restored versions of the mono tracks. Now, admittedly, I did have some involvement with this release and was able to sample some things and give some advice and provide audio captures and various elements of what I had. And so, unfortunately, when they got the transfer of the sound master in terms of the English dub, it didn't have the titles, which is seemingly why a lot of the other home video versions of the film have had different fidelity or a different quality or even different versions of the titles that are used, as apparently the master doesn't have those. So here, the best fidelity for the titles that anybody could find is my capture of the good old CBS Fox Laserdisc analog track. Unfortunately, it's got quite a bit of high-end distortion and some defects, as it's a 1985 analog track of a variety of print materials, but Arrow was able to do some cleanup work on it and actually incorporate that into their new restoration master of the English mono. And then when you listen to the rest of the film, the source master is no longer multiple generations away like we've experienced on all other versions of the film. So there is a clarity here we haven't had before, which is quite striking. The only thing here is that at some point, and this may have been in the source they were given from Ritrovata because they had to get these from Italy, there does seem to have been a degree of noise reduction introduced at some point. So this unfortunately isn't quite as untouched as the old CBS Fox 1985 Laserdisc analog being raw and as is, but this also has a clarity difference of it not having any generational loss, so that's your trade-off there. I wish there wasn't the application of noise reduction, but I don't really know if that was something Arrow did or if there was anything they could do about it. But there is such a clarity increase of this not having generational loss that's unfortunately your trade-off. But it is the best sounding version of the English mono we've had on a physical media release since at least 1999, and personally the only audio that I think comes close to this is the raw as is 1985 Laserdisc analog, but again you have to keep in mind that version is not complete and it has tons of defects because it's mixing and matching different prints and the very end switches to Italian. So it itself is not fully a complete reference version, but if you're an audio purist like me, you can get the 1985 Laserdisc and have a completely hands-off iteration of the English mono, but of course it's not a complete version. In terms of the limited edition package, Arrow has beautiful new artwork from Tony Stella, which matches on all three. We have a beautiful slipcase with lovely artwork that also matches, and a plethora of supplements, both new and old. This includes all of the legacy supplements from all past home video releases, including the MGM and Kino releases. Remove the slipcover to find the same incredible art on the hard case, and also a nice sort of wraparound effect with even more artwork, so it's quite expansive. The case itself has another beautiful new art piece by Tony Stella, and then inside we find the feature on the UHD plus the trailers and radio spots, and then the Region B locked second Blu-ray disc has all of the other supplements. There's even reversible art with the original 1967 United Artists one-sheet poster. We also have an extensive book with 4 brand new fantastic essays, plus a listing of all of the uncredited cast and crew from the original production, and full information about the actual cast and dates of the dub recording sessions for the English mono. So this is up to Arrow's usual high standards. And then we have the about the presentation notes and thank yous at the end. And as I said in my review of this is merely a Cliff Notes version of the intensive work that went into this release. So it's actually much more than just this single page. And then, of course, not to toot my own horn, but I actually managed to make it in the thank yous there. And then nicely, we have a replication of the fantastic MGM artwork dating back to the 1988 VHS release. There's also a lovely fold-out poster of the new interior artwork, which looks fantastic, which is reversible with a replica of the iconic United Artists one-sheet. Arrow's new on-disc supplements are extensive and absolutely fantastic, plus all of the legacy extras from all past video releases, all properly encoded, even the old standard definition ones, to look and sound as good as possible and make this release fully comprehensive. So this is truly the effort that all of us Leone fans have always dreamed of and never thought was possible for these films, given their long and troubled history in both film preservation, but also their long and troubled home video history, especially being caught and stuck between two rival rights holders, kings, if you will. So obviously this is not a perfect release, but it's darn near perfect. It's as good as it really could be, and such a sensational effort that it really does make all past video releases obsolete, and finally puts a nice, fitting new milestone in the film's long and varied home video history to finally have a single release that can be the recommended one to have on your shelf instead of having to have all of what you see behind me. So that is the overall video history of A Fistful of Dollars on the major physical media releases and format updates, usually tied to restoration attempts or video master refreshes. The film has had a very long and very troubled journey to get to the Arrow restoration efforts on their limited edition UHD set, so I wanted to do an overall video history to try and encompass all of this. This is all material that I had to learn myself the hard way. I started as a kid, and then in my teenage years was a Sergio Leone obsessive, and just wanted a video release that was proper and, was widescreen with the best quality for the original audio, and, maybe had some nice supplements. And apparently that was too much to ask, because these films had basically a curse on them in terms of their preservation status and their home video status. So every single one of Leone's films has a long and troubled history, but each one is different and has taken different routes. But it's amazing that we now have 3 stellar efforts from Arrow Video that do their darndest to try and undo and fix and address the long-standing issues that have been there since the original releases, but also the ones that have grown and changed and had new problems added in the decades since and the restoration attempts since. So this is not a mere film that's in need of restoration. It's a film that you have to do an incredible amount of research on and put an incredible amount of effort in to try and get things right and collaborate with as many people as you can. And we now finally have a release that is the product of someone indeed doing that. So the Arrow release is truly important. It is worth its weight in gold, and it is the one release that you should have on your shelf. But if you're like me, you probably have a great deal of nostalgia for all of the Leone releases you've lived with and tried to cobble together your own history and also your own version. So the Arrow will now be the sort of crown jewel of my Fistful of Dollars shelf. So as always, I hope my babblings about the incredible world of Sergio Leone's filmography and the never-ending physical media histories they've had has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Please definitely check out Arrow's incredible efforts on their UHD and Blu-ray sets if you haven't already. They are truly staggering efforts that are worth every single penny, and you will be able to replace every single past release you have of A Fistful of Dollars, except for perhaps the 1985 CBS Fox release for its completely untouched audio track. As always, please do keep supporting incredible efforts from studios and boutique labels, especially in cases like this, because in doing so, you're able to help not just physical media, but also film culture itself to survive. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Get 9 video coffins ready. My mistake. 10 video coffins.